When someone in a friend group decides to go to another person to talk badly about or plant something that seems benign,
some of the worst people you know, and in many cases, covertly the worst people you know, usually are surrounded by a very strong community that are really upholding and supporting them.
There is more truth to this than people will want to realize. They do not just groom their victims, they groom the bystanders as character witnesses.
I was just groomed as a character witness to a bad person, and let me tell you about it. So this whack ass dude is dating my friend, and he planted a seed in her mind about me from a year ago. He's like, watch out for your girl. I don't think she liked me. Like, watch out for your girl. And that's the thing about wolves in sheep's clothing. These manipulative ass people in your community, in your friend group. They so cool. They the life of the party, and then they take their mask off. And you have to decide in that moment if you're on board or if you're going to eject from the group.
so I experienced this type of manipulation in a friend group. And to be quite frank, I didn't really understand what triangulation was until really delving into my mother wound, recognizing even some of these patterns in romantic relationships. So when I was going through my divorce, I had a friend who was like adamant that I needed to write a book, and it never happened. I started to, but then I would stop. And then even as I would go back to read some of the passages that I was writing, I was like, I really can't write this book. And I realized that I was writing it from the vantage of a victim. And so it would be a disservice to really write that book at the time. And what I realized as time passed and over the years was that the book that I needed to write wasn't necessarily about romantic relationships or that relationship specifically. It really had to be about relationships in general. And so that's what I've been delving into, reflecting on, and researching in the past few years is the dynamics between romantic relationships, familial relationships, friendships, all relationships, and how they can all be parallels and mirror one another. So I have debated making this video for quite some time, but I saw 3 videos today that were discussing this topic, and it provided me with more verbiage in terms of what I had experienced, coupling it with everything else that I've been learning. I was like, you know what, let's talk about the bystanders that become character witnesses. So what happened in this particular friend group was that things were being said about me behind my back that I was not aware of. However, I did have an inkling because behaviors began shifting and changing. When I was going through my spiritual journey, it was a really great shift. I ended a relationship, a long-term relationship. I stepped into a very toxic relationship from which I also ended. And so my skill is that once I recognize patterns, it's easier for me to cut the cycle and walk away from certain things because I'm seeing a pattern of behavior. Maybe it's a Capricorn in me, I don't know, but I'm done. And it's really the best way for me to be able to move forward without harming myself or harming others. I had a particular situation that happened where a long-term friendship came to an end because, one, I think that it was just probably time for us to go our separate ways. We're growing in separate directions. With the things that came to light, I decided that it was time for me to walk away from the situation. What ended up happening was that she became a bystander and a character witness, but I was unaware of what was transpiring, even though I felt things were shifting and I felt the shift in energy and behavior towards me. And once I started feeling like I'm being bullied, once I started feeling like I'm being targeted and teased and like outlandish things were being said to me, but with no basis, I was like, maybe this is just not the place for me. And so I extricated myself. When you have someone that's whispering in the ears of your loved ones, sometimes it doesn't matter what you do because now they have become a character witness and they're watching for your actions that will reinforce what this other person is telling them, as opposed to just having a conversation with you. Personally, whenever I'm going through something, I tend to become a hermit. I will close myself off because I need to quiet the outside noise in order to hear my internal, in order to focus and to execute what it is that I'm trying to do. And most people that know me, they don't take offense to this because it's just my pattern, right? And it's not that I close people off or I shun people. I'm still available for those that need me. But for the most part, I'm not going to necessarily put myself out there because I have something that I have to work on. Me going through the spiritual journey, me going through these shifts and really expanding the work that I was doing, especially on social media, a person found their way into my friend group, and that's not to say that I was the head of it, but the circle that I was in, a person found their way in, and everything seemed cool at first, even though I was a little bit weary because I'm not the most trusting person. But I accepted, and I felt that I was building a nice friendship with this person. What I did not realize was that the person was telling a close friend of mine things that were untrue. They were dropping seeds. It's just like the woman that I shared, whose video also inspired this. The person brought up different instances where they felt like I disliked them. And instead of coming to me and having a conversation on both their part, nothing happened. But things were happening that I was feeling. I was catching strays from this individual that was dropping these seeds. And as I look at it in hindsight, what I realized was that they were trying to garner a reaction from me in front of other people so that way they can reinforce that I dislike them. But instead, because I'm no longer like this highbrow, angry, confrontational person, I don't react to certain things. I can respond if I choose to, but for the most part, it's going in the cache. It's going in the filing cabinet. And once I realize that this is not a person that I want in my life, I'm going to cut them off. Or if it's a situation where I genuinely do like this person and want to continue a connection with that person, I'll have a conversation with that person. With this person in particular, because I don't know what it was, but there was like this deep distrust within me in terms of their intentions. I didn't feel the need to have a conversation because they also weren't doing anything directly. And I was bypassing. I was keeping the peace because everybody else likes this person. So how can I not like this person? So I was keeping the peace instead of confronting what I was experiencing. I pretty much distanced myself from the friend group and especially that person in particular. A year later, I was invited to an event and I was like, I'm not gonna go to that because I'm not feeling this person. So I didn't go to the event, and I later had a conversation with a friend of mine who had asked me because she ended up not going for other reasons. But we had a conversation because we're actually really good friends. And I just shared with her how I felt and an experience that had transpired. And the experience actually involved her. What's interesting that happened in that situation was that the friend that I had shared how I felt with, who did not go to the party, I shared with her how I was feeling. She was like, have a conversation with your friends. You've known them for this long. You should talk to them. And so I was like, cool, I'm going to do that. So I had a conversation with each of my friends respectively. And then somehow word got back to the woman who was planting these seeds about me. And she ran to go call my other friend who I had spoken with initially to try to remedy the situation, but still made no effort to contact me or have a conversation with me. Although my long term friend did try to convince me to have a conversation with her, but it was more so for her own sake. I don't know that it was necessarily for me and how I felt. I don't know that how I felt really mattered because the seeds had already been planted and it seemed like I was the one that was being irrational. Because you had already had these seeds planted in your mind, me saying that I don't fuck with this person is affirming for you that I dislike that person because that person had planted the seed. And for me, that was heartbreaking. And it angered me. The fact that she reached out to my friend who I had the conversation with initially, but did not choose to reach out to me, told me everything that I needed to know. So the whole thing devolved, and I essentially decided that I was just going to step away from the entire friend group for my own sake, for my own sanity, for my own peace. And if they wanted to maintain that friendship and connection with this person who was intentionally trying to make me look bad, I just didn't feel comfortable being in those friendships. So why do I bring this up? Because one, my daughter, or both of them, my children watch I don't know if they watch my videos, but they do follow my channels. So a lot of the lessons that I have learned in life, it's really for me to just pass and pay it forward, for them to be able to recognize certain things, and not just for my children, anybody that I can assist with the things that I have experienced. That's why I share it. Sometimes friendships end. It's a conversation that I had to have with my children because it's the reality of life. They're learning it at a younger age than I had to, but sometimes friendships end. It doesn't mean that it was bad the whole time. It doesn't mean that you made a mistake in any way. There's certainly loss, and you're going to have to process grief depending on how deep that friendship was, how long that connection was. You got to go through the grief process. And the grief process, it has stages. There's no time to it. It can take a while. And it took me a while of grieving to accept that those connections and that friendship was over. It was beautiful while it lasted, but it was time for me to move on. So, how can you recognize these signs and these patterns? The first thing is really discernment. I've been key and honed on this for quite some years. Whenever your intuition is telling you something, you really want to begin to pay attention to it, because oftentimes, more than not, there's something there. Now, the same could be said for them, right? Maybe they were following their intuition, but I didn't go to anybody with what I was feeling. I instead questioned myself. Am I tripping? What are the behaviors that are leading towards this? Am I being triggered because of past experiences? Or is there something genuinely here? There was targeted animosity. I'm looking at behaviors to where teasing or bullying or accusations were being made towards me. I was being ostracized. I was being left out of certain things. I was being targeted. I was being called difficult. And none of these things were actually kind and true. There was a time where I had to confront my own actions because I had looked at something and I did not like how it appeared. I didn't like how I looked even in that experience. And so I confronted that issue by having a conversation with the person just to clear the air, to apologize. And they were like, they didn't think anything of it. It wasn't that big of a deal. And maybe they should have. Maybe it's something that should have been brought to my attention so that I can work on that. Because I'm okay with constructive criticism. I'm okay with honesty, because at the end of the day, I want to live honestly and authentically, and I want that for the people around me as well. It sucks losing friendships. It sucks going through these different types of situations with people, with women, with sisters, with family, with friends, whomever. It sucks. Certainly, I think that I definitely should have said something just to stand up for myself, not even for anything else, but to stand up for myself. I should have said something when it was happening, but instead, I was filing it away. When I built the RICO case, they were found guilty.